Hey, before you watch this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're one of the really cool kids, go to patreon.com/MattTheLast, links in the description. I mean, you weren't gonna use that money anyway, right? Souls games. Or like, what do you call them now? Soulsborne? Eero? Well, whatever you call them, you really can't deny the influence that they've had on the gaming landscape and culture. Miyazaki, the other one, was able to carve out an entirely new subgenre of action RPG. And that's an incredible accomplishment that not many can lay claim to. And I love them in a perfectly healthy way. And when you have something that red hot, you're bound to get imitators. And imitate they did. These games are, of course, like Souls games, and presumably made by people who like Souls games, so there's clearly only one thing you could call them. Souls-em-ups. And at the time of recording this, the next proper game from Elden Ring is nearly in our sweaty little grasping hands. But what if you can't wait that long? I really need to make these videos faster. What if you need your fix right now, and you've already linked the fire for the 800th time this week? Well then, my friends, you might be in the market for something a bit more off-brand. But which do you play? Wouldn't it be neat if some altruistic, studly YouTuber made a video talking about, say, 10 examples? I don't know, guys. I couldn't possibly... Oh, you know what? You talked me into it. But only because I'm so darn fond of you. And also because I can chase trends. I'm hip. But first, for the uninitiated, and to give you an idea of what I'm looking for in the genre, plus, cause I feel like it, I'm going to briefly describe what exactly is a Souls game. First there was Demon Souls, and it was great. And then they made Dark Souls, and it was great and popular. And then came Bloodborne, and everyone loved it forever. They're action RPGs. You hit things and they die. Unless they hit you, then you die. Killing things get you souls, which are both experience and currency. When you die, you leave your souls on the ground, which you then have to pick up. If you die before you get them back, they're gone. Forever. Basically, every action you take requires stamina. Running out of stamina leaves you open to harsh criticism. In Dark Souls, you rest at bonfires to refill your stuff, but it also resets all the enemies that you've killed. Yay! Bosses are absolutely key to Souls lore is mostly given through world design and item descriptions. This requires the player to largely piece it together themselves rather than having it explicitly told to them. Who would have thought these games would be subtle? Sweet. Now, if I've somehow left anything out, please feel free to let me know by clasping your hands together and wishing really hard. Now, let's talk clones. 2014's Lords of the Fallen, developed by Deck 13 Games, is their first attempt to capture that FromSoft magic. And while it's a valiant effort, it's some of the best evidence that just because you love something, that doesn't mean you'll be able to recreate it. Graphically, it's still a pretty good looking game. The architecture and world design is solid. And you know, that's a pretty good word for this game. Solid. Like a fucking slab. Okay, so there's no character customization in this game, so regardless of your class, you're stuck with Grumpy Gary here. I don't actually remember his name, but just look at him.
Fridge, large meat.
Punt, speed chunk.
Butch, deadlift.
Dude looks like he escaped from a Rob Liefeld D&D campaign. But if it were just Roid Rage here, that wouldn't be so bad, but just look at these character animations.
The men in here are just as twisted and corrupt as the people outside.
All that aside, how does it play? Well, not only does this guy look like a side of beef stuffed into plate armor, but he controls like it too. Points for consistency, I guess. Okay, so Dark Souls has what the community lovingly refers to as fat rolling. Basically, if your character's stats aren't strong enough to let them get around in whatever heavy-ass armor they're wearing, chonk. But in Lords of the Damn, dude, save some pauldrons for the rest of us. That's just kinda how it feels to move around, honestly. Even getting fully naked doesn't really do much to mitigate it. There's just something about the controls in this game that make it feel inherently heavy. Okay, so killing enemies grants you experience, which you then use to level up at these crystals. I mean, so far it's pretty standard stuff. Except in Lords of the Massive, your lost numbos start to dissipate if you wait too long. So not only do you have to get back there, but now there's a timer. Boo. Shit, well, the bosses start off fine enough. There's Baryshnikov here, who you basically have to smack and keep from getting smacked, you know. But eventually you get to bosses like this asshat, who not only hits like a truck, but then he spams these little minion spawning crystals at opposite ends of the area. And he does this giant arena-wide area of effect attack that you can only escape by taking shelter in one of his magic gazebos. This fight is absolutely doable, and once you know what you're doing, it's really not even all that hard, but it's multiple design decisions along with the overall clunkiness of the gameplay that make it feel more like a chore to play than a fun challenge to overcome. I mean, they certainly tried, but despite my desire to be charitable, I gotta say give this one a pass.
Buck, plank chest.
Stump, Junkman.
Dirk, hard peck.
3 years later, Deck 13 made a second attempt at getting the formula right and released the Surge. Did they succeed? Yes? You play as Warren, a handy-capable new hire at Creo, a tech conglomerate that totally isn't evil because they have video of happy people on a beach. As part of the onboarding, they offer you your very own rig, which is essentially a metal frame that will strengthen you, help you walk, and allow you to interface with their technology for on-the-job use. So, after choosing between light or heavy classes, the strogification begins.
Program complete. Patient sedated. Initiating surgery. Implanting neural link.
Oh no, my brains.
You know, I appreciate the whole visceral body horror aspect of this, but permanently attaching steel scaffolding to yourself for a job just seems like a lot. And I thought having to wear my old Staples uniform was bad. You wake up in what looks like a scrap heap seemingly left there to die. Not dissimilar to working at Staples. From there, you have to figure out what's going on at Creo, why people are killing each other, you know, that whole thing. Okay, so immediately, it feels a lot better than Lords of the Fallen. It just feels more responsive overall. In lieu of souls, your experience comes in the form of tech scrap. You take this scrap to medbays where it's turned into new pieces for your rig, upgrades to your power core which will allow you to attach more bits, as well as install more implants. And these implants have all sorts of different uses and abilities. Some allow for injectable healing charges, getting more info on your enemies, so on and so forth. The combat feels pretty good overall. There's a touch of clunk and some real jank from time to time, but it's a step in the right direction. And a good portion of it revolves around targeting specific enemy body parts. Going for unarmored sections deals more damage, but there's also a benefit to aiming for the less squishy bits. Okay, so landing attacks builds up your charge meter, and if you have a full charge when an enemy's health hits a certain low threshold, you can do finishing moves that knock off the portion of the body that you've targeted. And if that body part just so happens to have some tech on it, you can get a blueprint to build it yourself. So while you may be initially bodied by this sneaky astronaut fuck, with enough perseverance you can become the astronaut. Suck it, Aldrin. This one comes with a mild recommendation. If you can get it on the cheap, it may be worth checking out. It just leaves me with this nagging feeling that while they were onto something, they could do a lot better with this concept. In September of 2019, they did a lot better with that concept. Where Lords of the Big Bone may have shown us that love and desire isn't always enough to be a successful copycat, the Surge 2 Electric Boogaloo is evidence enough that time and effort may very well get you there. Or at least somewhere close. This time around, you play as, possibly, the lone survivor of a catastrophic plane crash. Instead of giving you a named protagonist, finally we get some character creation. So I decided to play as this elderly woman, because who's going to stop me? You wake up in a prison medical facility 2 months later after having slipped into a coma. One little aeronautical mishap and you go full coma? And you find the facility's gone completely batshit. Prisoners are out of their cells, everyone's at each other's throats, and this is some excellent timing because it means you can get your happy ass out of there. And holy crap, Nana is kicking some ass. I don't bake cookies, I crack skulls. The core here is very similar to that of the first game, but while the changes are subtle, they do a lot to improve the flow of combat and the pacing of the overall experience. Let me do a little brief comparison. The first real boss of the last game is with this security mech guy. The goal is to dodge his attacks while hacking away at his legs. Then, after sustaining a certain amount of damage, he does an attack where he fires missiles into the air and then they come back down at you. I think you're supposed to get under him so that he gets hit by those missiles. This then uncovers his weak spot for you to smack. Rinse, repeat, dead. It's not a horrible fight, but it feels kind of underbaked, a little bit glitchy. Not to mention that it takes a relatively long time to even make it to him unless you know what you're doing. In the Surge 2 Secret of the Ooze, it takes relatively no time at all to get to this dude. Aw, look who's got a name to go with his fancy health bar. Yes, he does. And it's a much more kinetic fight overall. This is in large part to the mechanics of banking health charges and directional blocking. In the last game, landing a smack gained you some energy to your energy meter. Now, this hasn't really changed this time around, but now you have the option to use a full energy bar to bank healing charges. It incentivizes a more active playstyle, trading blows with your enemy in order to stock up on much needed healing. Directional blocking is their take on the Soul's parry system. When an enemy does a blockable attack, there's a small window where you can tap the right analog stick in the direction your foe is attacking from in order to briefly stun them and open them up for a counterattack. And you know, it may not seem like much, but little tweaks like this make this feel so much better than the previous game. This felt like a major step up from last time, and therefore I'm much more comfortable recommending it as an off-brand Souls experience. Well done, Deck 13! Hey, you got your anime in my Dark Souls. Do you like these sorts of games and also have a Crunchyroll account? Well, have I got a game for you. All jokes aside though, this is a solid third-person Souls. The game begins post-apocalypse where your artisanally designed Animu avatar wakes to discover, whoa, those thin strands of fabric are working overtime. Does someone need to call Spiderman to help keep things together? Stop it. Okay, so you wake up to this girl in white helping you do a thing to a tree with some blood that makes a thing do... that? There's something about miasma that causes people to lose their minds or something, I think. I'm gonna be honest, guys, it's a lot of heavy, incomprehensible anime bullshit. And this is coming from a guy who knows his incomprehensible anime bullshit. But luckily, you don't actually have to engage directly with the plot to enjoy this one, because the gameplay more than makes up for it. First, I briefly mentioned the fairly robust character creation. You can craft your dream guy or gal from top to bottom, and things can get pretty absurd. Tiny hats rule! From there, it has you traipsing through a large world made up of connected areas, patrolled by all sorts of nasties who wish to stop you. This can be done solo, in multiplayer, or with a built-in AI companion, which is neat. For other people, that shit gets disabled immediately because I work alone. Alone. Instead of choosing your character type at the start of the game, Cod Vein includes a dynamic class system called blood codes. You can swap out your blood code at any time, and doing so changes your proficiencies, stat progression, and available special abilities. You only begin with 3 blood codes, but acquire more over time as you meet different characters and examine their backstories. There are a good number of weapons to acquire, and armor, which this game calls blood veils. There's a lot of blood everything in this one. But these blood veils also grant different parry and charge moves that can be used to deal lots of damage, as well as drain ichor from your enemies, which is the resource you use to do your various special moves. If you can't already tell based on what I've said, there are a lot of customization options in this game, and it's kinda great. The boss fights also seem to be varied and really well put together. I really like this one, guys, and if you can stomach the anime of it all, it's worth your time. Okay, so I was sold the moment I heard Souls-like, but with guns. And that's pretty representative of what I got, for the most part. It's another post-apocalypse plot, something about an evil entity called the Root, you're a survivor of this world trying to do something about all the pesky monsters, and you find your way to a large bunker filled with other survivors who will upgrade your stuff and sell you things, you know, your standard home base hub situation. After tutorial time with your new best pals...
Now get out of here. I'm tired of your yapping jaw.
You're sent out into the charred remains of a city in order to shoot everything even vaguely monster-shaped, delve into sewer-like dungeons, fight bosses, you know the drill. It's clearly inspired by Souls games, but what's odd is the complete lack of a Souls system in the game. Killing enemies or completing quests grants standard experience, none of which is actually lost on death. The only penalty for death seems to be that the monsters respawn. Getting enough experience grants you points that can then be spent on traits. Traits range from being able to boost your base stats like health and endurance, to this one called Climber that I seemingly got for just climbing on a bunch of stuff. That's pretty cool. There are weapon mods you can acquire and slot into your guns, 3 different starting classes that really change up how the game plays. There's a lot to like here. The bosses are my only major gripe. It's not that they're bad, but the first one is just a larger and meaner version of an enemy that I found roaming around the main map. Plus he has groupies. And the second one was just like this church with waves of standard enemies, plus you have to protect this tree lady thing. So don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed what I played of this one, and I highly recommend it, especially for those who are looking for something a little bit different, but also imagine a faint asterisk, just floating there. I hadn't heard anyone discuss Chronos Before the Ashes, but it's actually a prequel to Shooty Gun Souls. Although you'd hardly notice it without the introduction cutscene and the spinny crystal things that appear in both games. Chronos generally feels more like a traditional attempt at the genre, right down to the swords and the medieval fantasy landscape. That is, once you've left the ruined city at the start of the game. This one also contains a more standard experience system. Gaining enough experience grants you attribute points that you use to enhance your character. Fairly straightforward. But what's more interesting is the penalty for death. When you die, you don't lose progression to your next attribute point, but your character also ages by 1 year. This isn't just an aesthetic change either. When you're young, it's easier to improve your strength and agility skills, but as you age, the number of points required for those stats grows, and eventually you can't level them up at all. On the other hand, when your character becomes older, it becomes easier to gain levels in your arcane stat. It's a neat little play on age-granting wisdom. Also, every 10 years starting at age 20, your character is given a choice of traits. These stick with you as you play, but the nature of them changes as you get older. The game is full of neat little ideas like this mirrored portal that you can program to go to different places. Then you find a miniature one in a locked shelf, and once you're able to input the mini portal code, bam! Not only do you get access to the shelf, but it's Honey, I Shrunk the Adventurer. A similar thing happens with the first real boss of the game. Initially, he stomps you into a fine powder when you run into him, but later you're able to use the same trick to match his size, and then it is on. The bosses in general are just a major step up from Remnant. There's just so much more creativity in their visual design, and they're more fun to fight. There's also an increased emphasis on puzzle solving in this one, and while none of them were particularly taxing, we're not talking Talos Principle here, it was a welcome addition. Overall, it's a fun and inventive take on the formula with some really neat ideas. Big recommendation here. Which, of course, is what I would have said if they hadn't included a goddamn sliding block puzzle that you have to do 3 separate times towards the end of the game. Fuck those things, 0 out of 10, terrible experience. Sultan Sanctuary is the first 2D Souls-like that I've ever played, and since I'm old as sin, it speaks to me. I had wondered how this formula would work minus 1D.
Phrasing!
And the answer is... coming very soon, hold your horses. We start things out with character creation. Even if all the character designs look like doodles done by that kid who sat in the back of class and wore too much eyeliner, you begin the game in the hold of a ship. It has been arranged that the princess of your kingdom will wed a member of the royal family of an opposing kingdom in an attempt to bring peace to the two nations. You are tasked with escorting her across the sea. But the ship is attacked! Fear not, princess! I'll save you! You wake up on the beach with no idea where you are or what's become of the aforementioned royal parcel. Right off the bat, the combat feels excellent. Your character is fun to control, there's a great visceral response to taking down enemies, the parry move is responsive and fun to do, and the platforming is well implemented. The jumping and traversal is smooth, it's easy to make your way around the stages, and it adds another element to the already enjoyable combat. This time around, souls are salt, but instead of them also serving as currency, enemies drop gold coins. Only salt is lost on death, and to regain it you have to kill whatever enemy did you in. Luckily, if it's a boss, then you only have to damage them up to a certain amount, so that's pretty kind of them. The game also lets you choose Chef as a starting class, which would be awesome if it weren't totally there as a joke. Plus, we all know that's not how chefs fight. Beyond that, it seems to be a pretty standard Souls-like. If you haven't already given this one a shot, do it. Vigil: The Longest Night is our second 2D Souls game on this list. As of now, it's only on PC, and I actually hadn't heard of it until just recently. It's about as straightforward as a Souls-inspired, or should I say, Bloodborne-inspired game can be, but don't take that as a negative. You play as Layla, a member of an order known as the Vigilants. Apparently they be badasses. You return to your hometown to find that your sister is missing and that all manner of shit hath gone down. The story here is far more front and center rather than the Souls-style minimalism that one might expect. There are NPCs aplenty with all sorts of quests to give and dialogue to deliver, but it works well in this context. Graphically, it's a very pretty game. It definitely has that indie feel, but you can also tell that there was a lot of love put into its production. One thing that truly sets Vigil apart from all the rest of these is that dying results in a legitimate game over state. Like you're actually required to load your save at that point. So there's clearly no Souls mechanic in this one. Saving is done at these owl lanterns, but you can also do it anywhere with consumable items called fledgling blood souls. So at least there's that. Instead of souls, we're once again dealing with a standard experience system. Gain enough experience, you level up and you earn a skill point. You can then use these skill points in any one of 5 skill trees. There's one for each of the 4 weapon types, sword, axe, dual blades, and bow, and one general tree for those of us feeling more general. And no, I don't know what that means. The combat is very good and feels incredibly fluid. I especially like how damage and successful dodging comes with an indicator. Each weapon starts out with pretty basic moves. Hell, the sword doesn't actually do anything when you hit the strong attack button until you unlock the parry maneuver. And yeah, you've gotta unlock the parry before you can even do it. But honestly, unlocking these abilities felt more rewarding than restrictive, so I'm not even sure that's a complaint. There's a gear upgrade system with lots of different types of weapons and armor, and some of it's kinda kinky. I mean, hey man, no judgments here. Or like this cage helmet, if you weren't entirely sure that they love Bloodborne as much as we all did. And the bosses are all well designed and fun to murder. Hey there. So despite the complete lack of a Souls system, this one still fits, it's awesome, and you should totally play it. Okay, so we go from a fairly straightforward Souls-like to Grime. Grime tries its damnedest to be eerie and unsettling, and dagnabbit, it succeeds. The tone of this one went way off the rails into a dark cavern full of smiling boulder people. What am I? I'm a sculpted? Why is my head a singularity? I'm not sure if I even want an answer to these questions, but still I press on. Grime is not only the odd man out in terms of visuals and everything else, but it does some interesting things with the formula. This game's Souls equivalent is called Mass. You earn it not only by breaking the rock people, but by smashing rocks in general. You absorb this mass and use it to build yourself up at these monoliths that act as your checkpoints and fast travel locations. At first the combat feels fairly straightforward, but then the game has you use that black hole of a noggin to block attacks and absorb your foes. As long as their health bar is below a certain threshold, using your bonds at just the right time will cause them to be devoured. And if you absorb enough of the right type of enemy, you can use special items to gain special abilities. These range from the very helpful like increased max health to walking slowly. Absorbing enemies also gives you breath. As you absorb breath, you fill this bar, and a full bar lets you heal yourself. The third resource you get from both killing and absorbing is called Ardor. The more Ardor you have, the more mass you get from killing or absorbing enemies. There's also an ability you can get later where Ardor also increases the damage that you do. Now, despite this being clearly Souls-inspired, you don't lose mass when you die. Instead, you lose Ardor. I mean, I'm not sure I'm complaining, but it does seem weird. Especially when they included consumables that give you mass. Items like this have existed in the Souls games because you lost your souls when you die. Having consumable Souls items that aren't lost on death means that you can hold on to them if you get really screwed. But either way, you regain half your Ardor if you're able to make it back to where you died. It just seems like less of an incentive to get back to your body. Sometimes I just didn't bother. So despite the weird rock motif, there are plenty of weapons and pieces of armor, some even with set bonuses, and all sorts of different items scattered around the world or dropped by enemies. Gear scales with different stats, you can upgrade your weapons after a certain point, so that's all there. Oh, and the boss fights are really well designed. And they were able to integrate the absorption mechanic in a really fun and interesting way. So if you're able to time it just right, you can suck up a boss's body part like this and do a lot of damage to them. Or like in the second fight, you can absorb their projectiles and send it flying right back at them. It's a great use of a unique idea. Overall, I've got to give this one an emphatic recommendation as well. Yeah, it can be a bit rough around the edges, but that seems to erode away as you become bolder and chisel your way through it. And I thought Grime was weird. The last game on my list is Mortal Shell, and I'm not even sure where to start with this one, guys. Graphically, it's a very good looking game. I was gonna call it pretty, but I'm not sure that actually fits. The tone here is somewhere between Dark Souls and an H.R. Geiger fever dream, but perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. So this one is unique in a lot of ways. First, the tone is especially grim in a foreboding sort of way. Even the creatures who befriend you are eerie in their design and mannerisms, like this strange thing that calls you brother. The story is, well, you see, you play as this thing, and instead of getting armor in the normal sense, you find and inhabit different shells. These shells seem to be the corpses or bodies of deceased people, each with their own attributes and abilities. The Souls analog here is called Tar, which all enemies drop, but occasionally they also drop a resource called Glimpses. You can give those to this creepy lady in order to unlock a shell's abilities, each of which tells you a bit more about who they used to be. This is a really interesting method of world building. I just have so much respect for how unabashedly bizarre this game is in its design and tone. Like, instead of blocking like you would normally do in Dark Souls and Demon Souls, instead your character crusts over and hardens in keeping with the whole shell motif. Since this is the game's block mechanic, it prevents you from receiving damage for a short time, but it can be done in the middle of any move, even mid-swing. So if you time it just right, you can swing, harden and brace for impact, and when your enemy momentarily staggers from hitting your hardened form, you break free and you finish the attack. It actually provides a lot of options for strategy if you can get it down right. The Tarnished Seal provides the option to parry some enemy attacks, although I played a good portion of the game about an hour and a half before I even found the NPC who gifts it to you. Up until that point, you have absolutely no access to that mechanic. Which is a choice, but man does it make a big difference. Attacking enemies builds an ability meter known as Resolve. Parrying with no Resolve automatically gives you 1 full bar on the Resolve meter. If you parry with a full bar of Resolve, you can do a riposte that deals a lot more damage and also heals you a fair amount. And you know, that's pretty great, because while I'd expect all of these games to be hard, this one feels especially difficult for me to wrap my head around for some reason. The flow of combat is unique enough that, at least for me, it was hard to mesh with, if that makes any sense. I do like how when you lose all your health, you're unceremoniously flung out of your shell. That's pretty funny. Then when you do die, it shows what I'm assuming is the logo for the lead designer's metalcore band right before it fades to black. Even the item system is odd. You don't know what anything does until you've at least used it once. This is for better or for worse. There are items that poison you, but the game says nothing until you've shoved it down your... whatever... where does he shove it? On top of that, using the same item multiple times increases your familiarity with it. So like you learn how to better use healing items, or in the case of this loot, you start out by being really bad with it, and eventually increase your loot skills to an acceptable degree. As for the bosses, I think I fought some. I'm not sure. I ran into this ornery bastard out in the wild, and he has like a big boss-style health bar. Maybe he likes loot music? And then there was this one guy I fought, and I won a weapon? Was he a boss? I fought him in the tutorial area. What's going on here? Who is even a what? This one is just strange enough, unique enough, and honestly more dreary in its tone than the official Souls series is in many ways. And that's kind of a good thing? I feel like I should recommend it, if for no other reason than you can not only pet the kitty, but there's an achievement for doing it. The game's fun too. That was a lot to cover in one video, and I didn't even get to say everything that I wanted to. Otherwise, this damn thing would have been 5 hours long. But if nothing else, it's clear that the Souls-like genre is just getting started. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should probably beat a few more of these if I want to stay in good standing with the Gaming Masochist Society. I heard that on Tuesday, they're serving lemon squares while we see who can complete Ninja Gaiden while being hit with a riding crop. But perhaps I've said too much.